Hello, Consciously Parenting family, and welcome to the Conscious Coffee Break. I'm Jen Kobrick. I'm a holistic family consultant with the Consciously Parenting Project, and today we're talking about boundaries. And specifically, we're talking about why it's important to have clear boundaries. This is something that I hear pretty often from parents who did not grow up with a lot of strong boundaries, that it feels like having boundaries would be limiting the world. So instead of giving their kids the biggest, richest world with as many possibilities as possible, it feels like if they set boundaries, like that is reducing the world that's available to their children, and they don't want their children to experience limits in the world. And so when that's the case, these are parents who are not wanting to set a boundary about how much they're willing to do, how many activities they're willing to facilitate, how messy of projects they're willing to do, what time of day they're willing to start a big project with their kids, you name it. And the result is that these parents often feel really burned out, or don't realize until they hit the end of their capacity that they are at or past their capacity. And then something happens, like a child having a tantrum that needs their attention when they're already past the end of their capacity. They just don't have anything left to cope. And so I had this idea for sort of a framework for a way that we can, an analogy for how we can think about why it matters to have clarity about the boundaries, and how having that clarity actually opens up a lot more space. And as well as promoting a feeling of predictability, of security, of understanding the way the world is around us. So the analogy that I'm going to use is that we're going to imagine that you're going camping or going on a road trip or something like that, and you need to buy food in advance. All right. So we can say, let's say in the first version of this analogy that you know that you need to buy food in advance. You don't know whether you're going to be able to buy more food during the trip. You don't know whether you're going to be near where there's any grocery stores. Let's say you don't know how big of a cooler you're going to have, or even if you're going to have a cooler. So you don't know if you have a way to bring perishable food, or if it needs to all be, things like bread and vegetables that don't need to be cold. And you don't know how many people are coming on this trip, so you don't know how much food you need. And you're in the store, you're in the grocery store, and you're leaving tomorrow, and you need to buy food. What are you going to do? You could totally freeze. You could totally shut down and be unable to make a decision about what food to buy because you're overwhelmed by not knowing any of the parameters about what and how much food is needed and what kind of food. You could go crazy and buy everything, knowing that it's not all going to fit and a lot of it's going to end up getting thrown away. You could try to guess, and you might or might not end up being right. You might end up running out of food halfway through the trip, or you might, again, end up with too much and throwing a bunch of it away. But it's probably going to make that shopping trip feel pretty stressful and feel pretty unpredictable, and feel pretty out of control, I would imagine, because you just don't know what the parameters are. So now let's imagine that you make some calls while you're there in the store, and you find out, for sure, you get some firm RSVPs, and for sure now that there's 4 people coming. So you need food for 4 people for a week. And you find out in these calls where you're going and that you are not going to be able to buy any more food during the trip. So now you need food for 4 people for a week. So now you can make some decisions about how much and what food is needed total. And let's say in one of these phone calls you found out who was bringing the cooler and what size it was. So now you also know how much perishable food you can pack. And so you can fit X amount of perishable food in this cooler, and everything else is going to need to be stuff that doesn't need to be kept cold. So now you can make a really intentional shopping list, right? Now you can buy exactly the right amount of food, exactly the right kinds. I mean, there's still maybe a little bit of wiggle room, right? Because there's some things that are unpredictable. Like we don't know if somebody's maybe going to be a little bit hungrier or less hungry. So there might still be a little bit of extra food at the end of the trip, or a little bit of needing to ration food, so you can kind of budget the little bit of extra food in case people are a little bit more hungry and there might be a little bit left. But you can know how much food is going to be perishable, so you can intentionally plan, what kinds of food you're going to bring for different meals, and so you can make a really accurate plan for the food for this trip now. And it's going to take a lot of stress out of it too, right? Because now you can know exactly what to buy. You can go buy those things without needing to do a whole lot of worrying about it, without needing to do a bunch of guesswork. And you can know that it's going to fit and that it's going to feed everybody and that everybody's needs are going to be taken care of. So what does this have to do with boundaries? Well, the boundaries on your food decisions are the size of the cooler, the availability of food during the trip, the length of the trip, how many people are coming on the trip, and potentially if there's any food restrictions about what these people can eat or like to eat. Those are all boundaries. And those boundaries, far from making the world more limited, sure, maybe it does limit some things. Like maybe you were thinking about bringing milk for your morning coffee, and you realize there's not enough room in the cooler and there's more urgent things that need to be in there. And so you decide not to drink milk during the week and just to have your coffee black, or to bring some shelf-stable creamer that doesn't need to go in the cooler, right? So sure, there might be some limits in the sense that that you have to make some choices about what's going to fit within those boundaries. But the reality is that we're making those choices anyway. We just don't know it if we don't know what the boundaries are. If you didn't know the size of the cooler and you bought the milk, and then you're going to pack for the trip and it's too late to go back to the store and buy some shelf-stable creamer, but your milk won't fit in the cooler, well, now you don't have a choice. Now you don't have a choice to go buy shelf-stable creamer. Now you're just stuck with black coffee, right? So the boundaries are there, whether we want to acknowledge them or not, whether we're clear on them or not. And the only question is, are we going to get clear on them in time to be able to make our choices on purpose with the knowledge of where the boundaries are? So when we have a lot of clarity about the framework, when we have a lot of clarity about all of the boundaries that it's possible to know, then we can make really intentional decisions about how we're going to fill up the container that is created by those boundaries. And we can make decisions to fill up that container with our highest priority items, our highest priority foods in this case, or our highest priority activities, our highest priority needs in the framework of our lives and our parenting. So we can, when we're aware of the boundaries, we can have total freedom with the space that is contained in those boundaries. And we can have this feeling of security and confidence and safety, because we know where the boundaries are, we know what can fit within them, and we're not just floundering, not sure when we're going to run into a boundary that we didn't realize was there. So I hope that framework gives you a little bit of a new way to think about boundaries and to think about the container that you're creating for your life with the boundaries that you set, and how much space you have, how much freedom you have within the walls of the boundaries that you set. So if you have questions or comments about this reframe, or about how you figure out the boundaries in your life, then please leave us a comment or send us a message, or join some of our free community resources. You can find all of those through the links in the show notes. And I will see you next week. As always, have a lovely week, and I will see you on the next Conscious Coffee Break.